What makes one man so powerful that even the mafia hesitates to cross him? In the silent corridors of Quebec's underworld, a name whispers louder than gunfire: Martin Robert. No politician, no hitman, yet every move he makes shifts the balance of power. He doesn't shout, he doesn't threaten. He calculates. When rivals vanish and empires bend, his fingerprints are invisible, but his shadow remains. So who is he really? A survivor, a strategist, or something far more dangerous?
Marty is known to be the consummate politician.
The Shadow Rider, how Martin Robert entered the red and white before he became one of the most powerful men in Quebec's criminal underworld. Martin Robert was just another quiet face in Sainte-Sophie, a small town where nothing remarkable ever seemed to happen. Born on October 1st, 1974, his early life gave no hint of the legend he would become. Teachers remembered him as polite, quiet, and distant. There was no violence, no rebellion, just a boy who kept to himself. But fate doesn't always shout. When it's about to change everything, sometimes it whispers through broken glass and twisted metal. In 1993, Martin's life collided with fate, literally. A car accident cut short his final year of high school and left him with months of recovery. Doctors said he healed, but friends later claimed something in him had changed. Whatever burned behind his calm eyes had shifted. He never returned to school. Instead, he began spending time in biker bars across Quebec, bars run by older men with Harleys, tattoos, and connections. They weren't the kind of people your parents warned you about. They were the kind who didn't need to warn anyone. That was where Martin found his new education. The lessons weren't written in books, they were written in silence, hierarchy, and obedience. He learned that in the biker world, respect isn't requested, it's taken. Violence wasn't random, it was language. Every broken jaw, every firebombed car was a sentence in a conversation only the underworld could read. And Martin was fluent. By the mid-1990s, Quebec was burning. The province was locked in what came to be known as the Quebec Biker War, a brutal power struggle between the Hells Angels and the Rock Machine for control of cocaine routes, loan sharking, and territory. Over 160 people were killed, innocents included. Every few weeks, car bombs exploded outside cafes, gunfire shattered quiet neighborhoods, and morgues filled faster than police could investigate. To most, it was chaos. To Martin Robert, it was an opportunity. He joined the Death Riders, a support club for the Hells Angels, a stepping stone for those ambitious enough to want the real patch. Support clubs handled the dirty work: drug distribution, debt collection, intimidation, and sometimes murder. They were expendable, but essential. In that brutal ecosystem, Martin's talent for precision and planning stood out. He didn't drink heavily, he didn't brag, and he didn't flinch. When others fought for attention, he watched, calculated, and remembered. By 1999, his name was already surfacing in police files. Convictions followed: drug trafficking, arson, and weapons possession. But even behind bars, he never cracked. When most men turned erratic under interrogation, he remained calm, even courteous. Investigators began labeling him persistent and strategic, rare words for a street-level enforcer. The Quebec Biker War, where blood became currency.
This time didn't say a word came out, and he already had contacts within the Hells Angels. He always been hanging around the big guys.
The late 1990s turned Quebec into a battlefield. What started as a power struggle between two outlaw motorcycle clubs, the Hells Angels and the Rock Machine, spiraled into one of the bloodiest turf wars in Canadian history. It wasn't about pride, it was about control of cocaine imports, loan sharking, and the streets of Montreal. By the time the smoke cleared, more than 160 people were dead, including civilians caught in the crossfire. Bombings rocked quiet neighborhoods, drive-bys became background noise. Quebec was bleeding, and no one was safe. This was the crucible that forged Martin Robert. When he entered the scene, the Angels were already engaged in total war. Their enemy, the Rock Machine, refused to bend, even as the Angels pulled support clubs and muscle from across the province. The violence wasn't random. It was strategic, designed to erase competition and consolidate the Angels' monopoly on the drug trade. But the deeper you look, the more you see a pattern. Each explosion wasn't just vengeance, it was business. Each death, a transaction. Young soldiers like Martin were the tools of that transaction. The Death Riders, his first club, served as a disposable extension of the Hells Angels. They were the ones who lit the fires, handled collections, delivered packages, and silenced witnesses. The Angels stayed insulated. The Death Riders took the risks. For most, that was a death sentence. For Martin, it was a resume. Unlike the reckless brawlers who filled biker bars with loud threats, Martin operated differently. He studied. He observed the chain of command, how orders moved from top to bottom, how influence flowed upward. His background, no family history of crime, no prior allegiances, made him an ideal operative. Clean, quiet, loyal. To rise in the Angels, you didn't need chaos. You needed control. As the war escalated, Martin's role evolved. Police reports later revealed patterns in his movements, coinciding with known arson attacks and cocaine distribution points around Laval and Montreal. It wasn't proof, but it was enough for detectives to start marking his name in red ink. He was young, but his reputation was growing. Every act of precision, violence raised his stock. Then came the turning point. August 1997, the car bombing that killed and won one-year-old boy, Daniel Desrochers, outside a Montreal school. The blast wasn't aimed at him. It was meant for a rival biker. But that single tragedy changed the landscape forever. Public outrage forced politicians to act, and the full weight of Quebec's justice system came down on the outlaw world. Mass arrests followed. Raids swept through biker clubhouses across the province. But even under pressure, Martin didn't flinch. While others ran or flipped, he stayed. In the eyes of his superiors, that made him invaluable. He wasn't a hothead, he was patient, a man who understood that survival wasn't about muscle, it was about timing. By the time the dust began to settle around 2001, the rock machine had splintered, some members patching over to the Angels. The war's cost was enormous. Hundreds dead, dozens imprisoned, and entire neighborhoods scarred. But from that wreckage, a new hierarchy was forming. The Angels stood victorious, but they were weaker, their leadership gutted by arrests and infighting. Operation Shah QC, the sweep that missed its target.
Biker gang are facing charges of conspiracy to commit murder over the 8 years between 1994 and 2002, as well as several charges of first-degree murder.
April 15, 2009, across Quebec. Dawn broke under the wail of sirens and the heavy thud of battering rams. More than 1,200 police officers from the Sûreté du Québec and the RCMP moved in on biker compounds, homes, garages, and storage units. They called it Operation Shah QC, short for Springtime 2009. It was supposed to be the end game, the takedown that would cripple the Hells Angels once and for all. In theory, it was airtight. 5 years of surveillance, thousands of pages of wiretaps, a roster of names that read like a who's who of the Quebec underworld. 156 people arrested in a single morning. Club leaders, lieutenants, support members, accountants, smugglers. The raids were coordinated across Montreal, Sherbrooke, Trois-Rivières, and Laval. The press called it the biggest criminal operation in Canadian history. Police called it a cleansing. As tactical teams swarmed addresses across Quebec, one name on the arrest list was quietly missing from every location. Martin Robert. He wasn't hiding in a cabin. He wasn't in custody. He was gone. When investigators broke down the door to his Laval property, the house was empty. No sign of struggle, no evidence of flight. Just absence and timing too precise to be a coincidence. Inside police headquarters, that detail caused panic. Someone had tipped him off. Operation Shah QC had been executed under absolute secrecy, with warrants sealed until hours before launch. For a suspect to disappear that cleanly, someone had broken the code. In the underworld, whispers started immediately. The Hells Angels had always prided themselves on loyalty, but in Quebec, loyalty was currency, and information was gold. Had a crooked cop warned Martin? Or was his instinct simply that sharp? Even years later, investigators still debate that question. What's certain is that he vanished when the province turned upside down. While his brothers in leather were dragged before the cameras in shackles, Robert's name went out on the top 10 most wanted list. Charges included murder, conspiracy to commit murder, trafficking, and participation in a criminal organization. For almost a year, he became a ghost spotted once in the Dominican Republic, then in the Caribbean, and finally traced to Mexico. In January 2010, a joint operation between Interpol and Mexican police ended the chase. They found him inside a Cancun nightclub, calm, alone, unarmed. He didn't run. He didn't resist. The arrest report described him as cooperative and composed. 3 days later, he was extradited to Canada. The Vanishing Act, Mexico extradition, and a plea deal.
On écoute votre reportage. Merci, Alain.
Ouais. C'est dans ce chalet que René Balloun-Charlebois a enregistré son testament vidéo qui dure 1h48.
When the walls closed in on Quebec's biker elite during Operation Char QC, Martin Robert did what no one expected. He disappeared. The sweep had caught almost everyone who mattered. Chapter presidents, senior enforcers, even long-retired legends, but not Martin. For nearly a year, he was a ghost. To the police, it looked like luck. To those who knew him, it was precision. His last confirmed sighting before the raids was in early 2009, walking out of a Montreal gym with 2 associates. Days later, the Angels' world exploded into arrests. While hundreds were hauled into holding cells, Robert had already crossed the border. Investigators later learned he'd used a network of shell passports and offshore contacts stretching through the Dominican Republic, Haiti, and Mexico corridors typically used for trafficking, not escape. Yet somehow, those same routes became his lifeline. Interpol issued a red notice within weeks, naming him among Quebec's most wanted fugitives. Media outlets branded him a ghost with a Harley. He wasn't hiding in safe houses or wilderness cabins, he was living among tourists, blending into the noise of beach bars and neon streets. For a man trained to read environments, Mexico was perfect camouflage. Everyone there was transient, nobody asked questions. In January 2010, the hunt ended in Cancun. Mexican intelligence officers, working with Canadian federal agents, tracked him to a nightclub known for laundering cartel money. They expected a firefight. Instead, he walked out calmly when confronted. No resistance, no panic, just a faint smirk. The arresting officer later described him as composed, polite, and unnervingly calm. Back in Montreal, the headlines were triumphant. Most wanted Hell's Angel captured in Mexico. But inside law enforcement, the mood was conflicted. How had he slipped away in the first place? Who had tipped him off? No one ever found out. The theory that a mole inside the justice system warned him still lingers, whispered among detectives who worked the case. Robert's return to Canada wasn't the victory prosecutors hoped for. He was remanded to Bordeaux prison in Montreal, awaiting trial on charges including first-degree murder and gangsterism. But then came the delays. 5 years' worth, legal loopholes, procedural missteps, and disclosure battles turned the case into quicksand. The prosecution's empire of evidence began to crumble when the case finally reached court in March 2015. The once terrifying indictment had been reduced to a single charge: conspiracy to commit murder. The plea deal was surgical. He admitted partial guilt, received an 8-year sentence, but had already served 5 years in pre-trial detention. He walked out of the courtroom that same week, head high, tie straight, smirking again. The optics were devastating for law enforcement. Hundreds of arrests, millions in taxpayer dollars, and the man at the center of it all walked out nearly untouched. To the public, he was a criminal who'd gamed the system. But to the outlaw world, he'd done something far greater. He'd survived the state. When Robert re-emerged, the world around him had changed. The Angels' old guard was fractured. Some had turned informant, others had died. The men who'd once run Montreal's cocaine corridors were gone or irrelevant. And into that silence stepped Martin, older, sharper, patient. Graduation from chaos, how prison taught him patience.
L'impressionnante opération policière a eu lieu vers 10h10 ce matin sur l'autoroute 50 à la hauteur de Grenville-sur-la-Rouge.
For most men, 5 years behind bars is punishment. For Martin Robert, it was preparation. When he entered detention in 2010, Quebec's justice system was choking on the fallout from Operation Char QC. Too many defendants, too few prosecutors, endless procedural fights. For Robert, that meant time. He wasn't rotting, he was studying. Inside the grey concrete of Bordeaux prison, the biker hierarchy looked a lot like the one outside, only compressed. Street soldiers shared cells with cartel couriers, mob lieutenants, and corrupt union fixers. Every day was a lesson in human behavior. Robert listened more than he spoke, mapping personalities, weaknesses, and loyalties. Guards noticed his calm, no outbursts, no arguments. He read the room like a chessboard. He had access to men who controlled different corners of Quebec's black market. Contraband cigarette smugglers from indigenous reserves, construction union, enforcers and brokers tied to the Sicilian mafia's gambling circuits. To other inmates, these were connections. To Robert, they were puzzle pieces. He started seeing the underworld not as factions at war, but as overlapping supply chains waiting to be organized. Isolation sharpened that vision. Without bikes, cash, or soldiers, all that remained was influence, and influence survived only through patience. He began to detach emotion from decision-making. When fights erupted in the yard, he watched them like experiments. When younger inmates begged him for help, he offered none. He understood that every favor created a debt. That discipline made him dangerous. Most angels returning from prison came out louder, eager to reclaim territory. Robert came out quieter. During his 5 years inside, the biker world outside had imploded. The Quebec chapters were bleeding members, the mafia families were feuding, and the cocaine corridor that once defined Montreal's underground economy had splintered into smaller, desperate factions. When he walked free in March 2015, Robert was stepping into a vacuum. The old men were gone, and the survivors were tired. Everyone expected him to chase vengeance or reclaim turf. Instead, he did the opposite. He vanished from the party circuit. No flashy bikes, no public appearances. His phone went cold. Those who knew him said he started waking before dawn, pacing his property, taking calls on encrypted lines that changed weekly. Investigators noticed something different too. His spending pattern shifted less on cars or watches, more on shell companies and real estate. Surveillance photos showed meetings not with bikers, but with accountants, mid-level union figures, and businessmen with no criminal records. He had redefined power. World status, the tattoo that changed his power map.
Biker boss in North America right now.
By the time most of Quebec's biker hierarchy was trying to rebuild what Operation Charcuse had destroyed, Martin Robert was quietly doing something no other Canadian Hells Angel had achieved, crossing borders without resistance. 2017 marked the moment that confirmed how far he'd come. According to multiple French press reports, Robert was granted honorary world status with the Côte d'Azur chapter on the French Riviera. It wasn't just a symbolic nod, it was an elevation. Inside the Hells Angels, world means access to a license to operate anywhere, without explanation, without asking permission. The proof of that new rank was burned into his skin. When a photo surfaced showing a massive back tattoo stretching shoulder to shoulder, the bottom rocker didn't read Quebec or Montreal. It read World. In biker language, that word is rarer than diamonds. It signals not geography, but the authority to move product, money, and men across continents as a recognized equal to any chapter on Earth. The tattoo wasn't bravado, it was a passport. Behind that promotion was a strategy. After his release in 2015, Robert began bridging networks that had never cooperated smoothly before. In Europe, Angels controlled cocaine intake through Spanish ports and biker corridors from Rotterdam to Marseille. In Canada, Quebec served as the western gateway for that same supply chain. Robert became the translator between those worlds, part diplomat, part accountant, all business. He used encrypted phones and offshore shell companies to move money the way earlier Angels moved guns. Within 2 years, his travel record read like a logistics manual. France, Spain, the Dominican Republic, and occasionally the Middle East. Police intelligence units tracking his movements noted something unusual. He never stayed anywhere long. 3 days in Monaco, a meeting in Barcelona, gone by the weekend. The pattern wasn't paranoia, it was process. A man who could be traced could be trapped. A man always in motion couldn't. His new global standing changed how others treated him. For younger bikers, he became a myth. The Quebecer who'd outrun Charcuse, outweighted prison, and come back with the world rocker. For old guard leaders, he became a necessary partner. the one figure who could smooth deals between the European traffickers, North American distributors, and the cash-rich intermediaries in the Caribbean. Police briefings began to describe him less as a gangster and more as a broker. He wasn't giving orders for drive-bys. He was negotiating container shipments and laundering strategies. Every alliance he built had a financial spine: casinos, cigarette smuggling, offshore construction investments. The Angels still rode for reputation, but Robert was riding for infrastructure. The Wedding Alliance: How a Marriage Merged Mafia and Biker Empires. December 2018. The ballroom of Montreal's Windsor Hotel shimmered with gold light and whispers. The guest list wasn't typical bikers in tailored suits, mafiosi in silk ties, and a few men whose faces never appeared in photographs. At the center of it all stood Martin Robert, not in leather, but in a dark suit, smiling faintly beside his bride. It wasn't just a wedding, it was a merger. His marriage marked one of the most strategic unions in Quebec's criminal history. Public records later confirmed what investigators had long suspected. His new wife came from a family deeply tied to the indigenous smuggling networks that bridged Canada and the United States. Her relatives controlled lucrative corridors of contraband, untaxed cigarettes, cannabis, and cross-border trade shielded by the complexities of federal and tribal jurisdiction. Her mother, Sharon Simon, was well known among law enforcement circles as a longtime distributor with roots in both the Mohawk Underworld and the South Shore smuggling pipelines. For Martin, this wasn't romance. It was realignment. The wedding connected three worlds that rarely cooperated: the Hells Angels muscle, the Sicilian mafia's financing, and the indigenous corridors that moved goods no government could fully regulate. The ceremony itself was attended by high-ranking angels, including European delegates and several members of the Rizzuto crime family, heirs to Montreal's most powerful mafia dynasty. It was less about vows, more about verification proof that alliances once built on distrust could now share a table. That union granted Robert something more valuable than money: jurisdictional immunity. Operating on indigenous land meant federal police had limited reach. It turned his new family's properties into safe zones, perfect for cash movement and discreet meetings. It also gave him access to businesses that appeared legitimate: construction firms, tobacco distributors, and casinos, all cash-intensive, all ideal for laundering. The most significant of those assets was the casino co-owned by Robert and members of the Rudo crime family, located on indigenous territory. According to investigators, it became neutral ground, the new Underworld's diplomatic hall. Angels and mafia leaders met there to settle disputes, negotiate deals, and divide profits. It was the closest thing the outlaw world had to a United Nations. Police surveillance noted subtle changes after the wedding. Smuggling routes once dominated by Sicilian intermediaries began accepting biker logistics teams. Cigarette shipments moved alongside cocaine loads, protected by a shared security network. The Sicilians provided legitimacy, the bikers provided muscle, and the indigenous distributors provided invisibility. For law enforcement, it was a nightmare. Three worlds, one pipeline. Even the old guard mafia, which had once sneered at bikers as reckless thugs, began showing deference. In private conversations captured on wiretap, mob elders referred to Robert as Il Canadese Calmo, the calm Canadian. It wasn't mockery, it was respect. He had built what no mob boss or biker president ever had: a true hybrid empire, diversified and borderless. The casino corridor, building a laundering empire on native land. By 2019, Martin Robert had something far more valuable than a biker army. He had a legal business that printed plausible income. On the outside, it looked like a casino on Mohawk land, just another entertainment venue flashing neon above the St. Lawrence River. Inside, it was the nerve center of a continental economy that moved cash, contraband, and cocaine without crossing a visible border. The location was perfect. Under Canadian law, First Nations territories enjoy self-governance. Provincial gaming and taxation statutes apply differently, and federal police require special authorization to conduct raids. That meant what happened on reservation land moved through a legal loophole, a gray zone that smugglers had exploited for decades to ship cigarettes, cannabis, and alcohol. Robert didn't invent the system, he industrialized it. According to RCMP intelligence summaries leaked to Le Journal de Montréal, he, became the majority stakeholder in one such casino, while minority shares went to trusted figures from the Rudo crime family. To the public, it looked like reconciliation capitalism. First Nations entrepreneurship paired with private investors. To law enforcement, it looked like the perfect laundromat. Every night, thousands of dollars came through slot machines, poker tables, and sports bets. Most of it was legitimate play. The rest was dirty money slipping through the same tills. When patrons cashed out, the money left as winnings, untaxed and untraceable. Add a few accountants willing to blur ledgers, and suddenly, street cash from cocaine or cigarette sales became clean revenue reported to the Canada Revenue Agency. But the casino wasn't just about laundering. It was diplomacy, neutral ground. Meetings between the Hells Angels, Sicilian capos, and indigenous transport bosses could happen without police intervention. The parking lot hosted cars registered to everyone from mid-level bikers to Montreal's old-world mafiosi. One investigator described it bluntly, "That place is Switzerland." Robert used it to negotiate a truce and trade. When the Angels' European chapters needed Canadian port access for inbound product, the deals were drawn there. When the mafia wanted safe passage for outbound currency, the handshake happened under the casino's chandelier. The atmosphere stayed polite, professional, even ceremonial. The casino floor hummed with oblivious tourists, while, one level below, the most powerful men in Quebec's criminal economy redrew the map. For the Mohawk partners, the arrangement meant stable revenue and protection from rival distributors. For the mafia, it meant liquidity. For Robert, it meant leveraging the one resource stronger than fear. Anyone using his corridor owed him something, a favor, a percentage, or silence. By late 2019, the casino had become so central to Quebec's underground economy that police intelligence reports labeled it the corridor. Every dollar washed there carried traces of cooperation between worlds once sworn to destroy each other. The mafia had its accountants, the bikers had their logistics, and the indigenous network had its sovereignty. The global broker, turning violence into logistics. By the time 2020 rolled around, Martin Robert had stopped acting like a gang leader and started behaving like a multinational executive. The traits that once made him lethal: discipline, patience, and detachment had matured into something even more effective: strategic neutrality. In an underworld addicted to chaos, he became the man everyone could do business with. Violence was still on the table, but only when it protected profit. He didn't eliminate rivals with bullets anymore. He eliminated them with invoices. Investigators first noticed the shift through communications intercepts. Gone were the coded calls about shipments or loads, references to supply chains, logistics hubs, and distribution schedules. The language of the boardroom had replaced the slang of the bar. When the Angels' European network needed coordination between Spanish cocaine ports and Quebec importers, Robert handled the scheduling. When the Sicilian families wanted to stabilize the price of the product flowing through Montreal, he handled the diplomacy. He was no longer just a Hell's Angel. He was the bridge between three criminal economies: Europe's cocaine corridor, North America's smuggling pipelines, and the Caribbean's laundering archipelago. His phone connected them all. RCMP analysts tracing encrypted servers found conversations jumping from Montreal to Rotterdam, from Curacao to Dubai within hours. It wasn't random chatter, it was coordination. What made Robert exceptional wasn't ruthlessness, it was restraint. In an era when underworld bosses flaunted cars and social media bravado, he avoided public attention entirely. No Instagram, no visible fortune, just a reputation that scared louder men into silence. Associates described him as almost corporate, arriving at meetings early, never intoxicated, meticulously dressed, phone in hand, eyes always scanning exits. The same composure that had once unnerved prison guards now defined his leadership style. Financially, he replaced gunfire with dependence. Independent crews moving contraband through Quebec's ports gradually realized that their shipments, their safe houses, even their accountants, were tied to Robert's network of shell companies. To cut him out meant losing access to suppliers and credit. He built a monopoly not by force, but by efficiency. Police intelligence in 2021 began using a new phrase, the broker model. They saw him as the prototype of a new generation of organized crime leadership men who used global trade patterns the way earlier bosses used street corners. He treated violence as a business, cost, necessary sometimes, but only when spreadsheets failed. Every murder or disappearance around him carried financial logic. Rivals who threatened distribution didn't survive. Those who cooperated prospered. Even the mafia adapted. The Rudo family, once dominant over Montreal's cocaine importation, now relied on Robert's bikers to move product inland. The balance of fear had inverted. Old world dons began deferring to a biker who didn't even need to raise his voice. In private, they admitted he'd become indispensable, his network too intertwined with their own to challenge. Law enforcement found itself equally trapped. The Hells Angels had been built to survive raids and gang task force crackdowns, but not to evolve into a global logistics consortium. Robert had done exactly that. Every attempt to isolate one arm of his operation only strengthened another. Cigarettes fund cocaine. Construction contracts funded casinos. Casinos funded real estate trusts. Each layer legitimized the one beneath it. The highway ambush, when bullets missed but messages landed. Spring 2023, a black SUV speeds down Highway 440 outside Laval, Quebec. Inside sits Leonardo Rudo, head of the Sicilian Mafia's Montreal faction, a man whose last name once controlled the city's cocaine and gambling trade. At 8:12 p.m., traffic cameras catch flashes of muzzle fire from a dark sedan that pulls alongside. Shots tear through the driver's side, punching through glass and metal. Rudo survives barely. His car spins into the divider. Within hours, Quebec's underworld knows the unspoken truth. Someone had just tried to erase the city's most connected mafioso. The attack wasn't random. Rudo had enemies everywhere, but the timing, precision, and choice of location pointed to something more strategic. Laval was neutral ground, far from the chaos of downtown and under heavy surveillance. Whoever ordered the hit knew his route, his schedule, his vehicle. That required access that only a few could possess. And among those few, one name surfaced immediately: Martin Robert. Police raided multiple addresses that same night, including Robert's home, searching for ballistic evidence or encrypted phones linking him to the ambush. They found nothing. Not a weapon, not a casing, not a single trace. He was questioned, released, and seen the next day at a cafe, calm as ever. For the public, it was a coincidence. For the underworld, it was choreography. Investigators built several theories. The most obvious was the Hells Angels retaliating after the mafia had encroached on their smuggling corridor. But the attack's surgical precision felt corporate, not emotional. Some detectives suggested a deeper play. Remove the old mafia leadership to make room for a new hybrid economy led by Robert, one that replaced family bloodlines with flexible alliances. If that was true, the highway ambush wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was a business decision. Rudo's survival complicated things. He refused to speak with police, but within days his lieutenants began vanishing, one to a supposed overdose, another to a robbery that left his safe untouched. The message was unmistakable: silence or extinction. In Montreal's hierarchy, fear flowed downward fast. Every rumor pointed back to the same quiet architect who never raised his voice. Federal intelligence noticed changes in Robert's behavior too. His travel increased. Flights logged from Montreal to Dubai, Nice, and Nassau in quick succession. He stopped sleeping at his usual property, choosing high-end hotels under aliases instead. To some, it looked like paranoia. To others, it was risk management, a man insulating himself before a power shift turned violent. Then came the whispers of a truce meeting. Sources told Radio Canada that Robert arranged a sit-down between remaining Rudo loyalists and select angels. The meeting reportedly happened not in a clubhouse, but at his own casino on Indigenous land, neutral ground again. No guns, no raised voices, just negotiation. The mafia wanted stability. Robert wanted control of the corridors that Rudo's people had monopolized for decades. By the meeting's end, new distribution terms were set. Days later, cash began flowing through Robert's shell companies at twice the previous rate. The bullets on Highway 440 had missed their mark physically, but they'd hit exactly where intended authority. The failed assassination humiliated the mafia, exposed its vulnerability, and reinforced the legend of the biker who could bend empires without drawing a weapon. In Quebec's criminal order, survival is power. And after that night, one truth became undeniable. Martin Robert didn't need to pull the trigger to win. Others did it for him, sometimes without realizing they were working from his script. Meetings before murder, Del Balso, Plouffe, and the parking lot. Mystery, June 5, 2023. The morning air in Dorval hung, heavy with humidity, the kind that sticks to skin before rain, at 10:47 a.m. Security cameras outside Monster Gym captured 3 men talking quietly beside a line of parked cars. Francesco Del Balso, freshly released mafia enforcer. Stefan Fest Plouffe, longtime Hells Angels lieutenant. And Martin Robert, the calm figure whose presence alone could change the temperature of a room. No shouting, no gestures, just small talk and unreadable faces. 6 minutes later, Del Balso walked toward his BMW alone. He never made it inside. A single round cracked across 90 meters of open asphalt. One shot, one body. The bullet struck before anyone heard the sound. Gym members inside kept lifting weights. Music drowned the echo. By the time police arrived, Del Balso lay dead, blood pooling beneath a car door. There were no shell casings, no muzzle flash, no footprints. Whoever pulled the trigger had trained for this moment, an assassin's level of distance, timing, and escape discipline. To detectives, the obvious question wasn't who fired, but why Del Balso was standing with Robert minutes before he died. The victim wasn't small-time. Del Balso had been a senior lieutenant under the Rudo Mafia clan, controlling Montreal's multi-million-dollar sports betting empire before his 12-year prison term. He'd kept silent through interrogations, earning respect, but prison changes the order of things. When he walked out, he discovered his empire gone, reassigned to younger men. In the code of that world, silence should buy reinstatement. Instead, it brought humiliation. So he reached out to the one man who balanced both biker muscle and mafia influence, Martin Robert. Police wire intelligence later suggested Del Balso proposed a partnership to revive his gambling operation, using Robert's cocaine corridors and a fruit import company as cover for cash movement. A clean operation on paper, catastrophic in politics. Word leaked almost immediately. The Rudo hierarchy saw betrayal. Rivals smelled opportunity. Within days, an anonymous bounty appeared on Montreal's encrypted message boards. $400,000 for Del Balso's head. 2 attempts failed before that morning in Dorval. Each time, Del Balso escaped with minor injuries. Each time, the pressure grew. By early June, he was desperate, convinced Robert could broker peace or protection. That meeting at Monster Gym was supposed to settle accounts, either through business or reconciliation. Instead, it became execution. Investigators rebuilt the timeline frame by frame. 10:47 a.m. Conversation. 10:53 a.m. Del Balso departs. 10:54 a.m. Impact. 90 meters of clean trajectory means professional-grade optics and a suppressor. The sniper knew the exact moment Del Balso would cross the sight line between 2 parked vehicles, information only someone at the meeting could have provided. That single detail turned a homicide into a riddle. Robert and Plouffe attended the funeral days later, silent among black coats and mirrored sunglasses. Cameras caught Robert's face, once expressionless, neither mourning nor gloating. For the Underworld, his presence answered everything without a word. In that culture, you attend funerals for 2 reasons: to pay respect or to confirm completion. No one could tell which reason applied. After the murder, territories Del Balso once controlled, bookmaking cells, cash drop sites, cocaine corridors, folded quietly into Robert's sphere. No gunfights, no headlines, just administrative absorption. Law enforcement analysts mapped the result on whiteboards and saw what looked less like a crime scene and more like a corporate acquisition. The case remains open. No charges, no weapon, no witnesses. Theories circulate that the Rudo family sanctioned the hit, that a freelance sniper collected the bounty, that Robert orchestrated the meeting to position Del Balso perfectly. All unproven, but the optics are immutable. A man met Martin Robert seeking help, and minutes later, ceased to exist. In Quebec's underworld, such symmetry isn't a coincidence, it's design. And design is Martin Robert's signature. Ghost operations, Dubai, Dublin, and the Nightwolves connection. After Francesco Del Balso's murder, Martin Roberts' name started appearing in files that had nothing to do with Canada. In late 2023, Interpol flagged a string of short-stay international flights. Montreal-Nice, Nice-Dubai, Dubai-Dublin, and back again within weeks. None of the travel violated parole or immigration law, yet each destination coincided with movement inside the global narcotics trade. To the police, it looked like a coincidence. To analysts, it looked like coordination. Dubai came first. Security camera footage from the Zuma restaurant showed Robert dining with Angelo Pandelli, the Australian national president of the Hells Angels, and an Irish intermediary tied to Europe's Kinahan cartel. 3 men, 1 table, no phones visible, 1 bottle of water, untouched through the entire meeting. Intelligence units called it the Summit, a neutral ground gathering of logistics chiefs from 3 continents. No violence, no arrogance, just quiet planning about port access, shipping insurance, and cryptocurrency flows to hide bulk cash payments. Dublin followed. The Irish cartel had been losing control of Antwerp's cocaine docks after a wave of European arrests. Within a month of Robert's visit, import seizures dropped dramatically, and new distribution cells appeared across Belgium using Canadian-registered shell companies. RCMP analysts later traced those shells back to businesses already linked to Robert's casino network. It was the same pattern. N financial scaffolding first, product second, guns never. Then came the Moscow connection. Between 2022 and 2024, immigration records showed multiple trips by Robert to Russia under business-class aliases. At the same time, Europe was reeling from sanctions on fuel and energy. The timing fit too neatly. He was rumored to have met figures associated with the Nightwolves, Russia's largest state-aligned motorcycle club, infamous for acting as cultural envoys for the Kremlin. Photos never surfaced, but one tattoo did. A detailed outline of the Kremlin's towers, inked across his shoulder blade, spotted in a leaked image from a private event in Monaco. Whether symbolic or literal, it reinforced the theory that his operations had expanded beyond narcotics into black market energy shipments routed through Eastern Europe. If true, it explained his new immunity. The Nightwolves operated with unofficial Russian state protection, giving Robert a geopolitical shield few criminals could dream of. In the shadows of global sanctions, his network may have become an informal supply broker, moving fuel, pharmaceuticals, even rare metals. Anything that could bypass embargoes. The profits dwarfed the drug trade. Western intelligence agencies quietly recategorized him, no longer just a high-value organized crime target. He was now listed as a transnational facilitator. That phrase meant more than rank. It meant function. He wasn't running from governments anymore. He was operating parallel to them, exploiting the gray zones where politics, commerce, and crime overlap. Even his communication style evolved. Investigators monitoring encrypted traffic noted bursts of messages between Montreal IP addresses and nodes in the United Arab Emirates, followed by radio silence lasting weeks. The pattern suggested one-time pads and relay servers, a level of operational security usually reserved for espionage. To his own club, Robert's travel signaled something simpler. Expansion. He was opening corridors, not chapters. For every biker arrested in Canada, a banker appeared overseas, willing to process their funds. Violence had been replaced with infrastructure. By early 2024, whispers inside European law enforcement described him as the invisible link, the man who could connect Moscow's fuel brokers, Dublin's smugglers, and Montreal's bikers in a single transaction chain. No official indictment named him, but everyone in the business knew. If the product moved smoothly across borders, someone had cleared it. And clearing it was Martin Roberts' specialty. He no longer rode just for the Angels. He rode for the entire underground economy that didn't exist on any map, but answered, silently, to him. The Infrastructure King, from contraband to contracts.
By a trade union in 2008, thousands and thousands of dollars in meals by simply filing a small scrap of paper.
By 2024, Martin Roberts' reach extended far beyond the world of motorcycles and money laundering. The old definition of organized crime gangs, rackets, and protection fees no longer fit what he had built. He wasn't running rackets anymore. He was managing infrastructure, the kind that governments depend on but can't fully see. It began quietly through the FTQ construction unions, long a gray area where politics, labor, and corruption collided. Decades earlier, biker crews had leveraged intimidation to influence bids for public contracts. Martin took that crude model and refined it into an art form. With his casino funds and offshore accounts, he started investing in legitimate development companies. These firms didn't wave flags or wear patches. They filed permits, hired unionized workers, and built roads. Yet buried deep in their ownership structures were names and shell corporations tied to Roberts' network. The advantage was twofold. First, it created a new laundering mechanism for clean contracts, clean payrolls, and clean invoices. Second, it gave him leverage over the backbone of Quebec's economy. If construction slowed, politicians got nervous. If contracts disappeared, union rioted. Through quiet intermediaries, Martin could shift millions with a phone call, all while staying invisible to enforcement. He had learned the lesson of every fallen gangster before him. Violence brings headlines. Infrastructure brings silence. Soon, the same pattern appeared in other industries. His network began acquiring stakes in logistics companies, trucking depots, and import-export businesses operating out of Montreal's port. What once served to move cocaine and cigarettes now carried steel, lumber, and food. It was a form of camouflage so effective that even financial auditors couldn't trace the dirty cash once it entered legitimate trade. Law enforcement agencies called it the integration phase, when the underworld stopped existing as a separate entity and merged with legitimate commerce. Analysts described Robert as a criminal who understood economies better than economists. He had effectively privatized control of Quebec's grey markets. Even rivals who despised him found themselves dependent. Street crews needed his transport lines. Construction magnates needed his unions quiet. The mafia needed his casino liquidity. Every favor he granted created a chain of obligation that could not be broken without collapsing the system itself. That's why, by mid-2024, the idea of taking him down became almost theoretical. The RCMP could arrest individuals, but not the infrastructure that sustained them. His businesses employed legitimate workers. His casinos paid taxes. His contracts rebuilt highways. Every attempt to isolate him risked collateral damage on an economic scale. A retired Quebec prosecutor put it bluntly, he's no longer part of the system we can police. He's part of the system we rely on. Meanwhile, Robert's lifestyle remained understated. He lived in guarded anonymity, no yachts, no palaces, no social media presence. His power was measured in dependence, not decadence. And that dependence now extended to every corner of Montreal's economy, from construction sites to the cigarette warehouses of Kanawake, from biker clubhouses to polished boardrooms downtown. What he had built wasn't a gang nor a cartel. It was a machine, one that generated influence instead of noise. When his associates called him the boss, he corrected them quietly. No, he would say, I'm the infrastructure. And for once it wasn't arrogance, it was the truth. Underworld diplomacy, the deals that rewrote power in Montreal.
Et il publiait des photos où on le voit avec un tatouage du Kremlin sur la poitrine. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire? Et quelle est la véritable importance de Martin Robert au sein des Hells Angels? On en parle avec Simon Godbout, qui est un ancien enquêteur de la Sûreté du Québec, le spécialiste du crime organisé. Bonjour Simon.
After 25 years of blood, prison and paranoia, Martin Robert had become something that Quebec's criminal world had never seen before, a diplomat. He wasn't negotiating ceasefires, he was writing trade agreements for criminals. By 2024, Montreal's underworld wasn't just fragmented, it was fatigued. Arrests crippled the Rudo Mafia, street gangs were in open rebellion, and the Hells Angels' older guard was either dead or in hiding. What kept the whole ecosystem from collapsing was a single balancing figure: Robert. His neutral power came from something rare: credibility with everyone. The Mafia trusted his discipline, the bikers trusted his backbone, and the emerging crews respected his precision. So when disputes erupted over ports, unions, or smuggling routes, all roads led to him. And unlike other brokers, he didn't pick sides. He monetized the peace. In early 2024, multiple intelligence briefings from the Sûreté du Québec described Robert's casino property as a meeting zone of last resort. There, over espresso and whispered conversation, longtime enemies divided markets like businessmen. Gang representatives from the city's north end met with Sicilian capos. European angels negotiated port access with Dominican middlemen. Each deal had one condition: Robert's network handled logistics. In return, he took a small cut from every shipment, every truckload, every wire transfer. Tiny percentages that, multiplied across continents, became wealth no drug bust could ever dent. But diplomacy in that world demands constant recalibration. When Anna Tupac Atna, a violent new gang leader, began torching mafia-protected restaurants and extorting businesses across Montreal, the fragile peace trembled. The Rudos wanted retribution. The Hells Angels wanted distance. Robert wanted control. According to internal police memos, he convened a series of crisis dinners at safe houses along the St. Lawrence River, bringing together lieutenants from every faction under the guise of reconciliation. Those meetings didn't end with treaties. They ended with reassignments. Territories were redrawn, street crews absorbed, and shipping lanes quietly handed over to his people. The violence stopped, not because justice prevailed, but because everyone owed him something. He applied the same diplomacy internationally. His European connections turned cocaine shipments into joint ventures between gangs that had once been mortal enemies. His Dubai intermediaries brokered insurance for illicit cargo under the cover of legitimate freight. In Russia, the Nightwolves acted as security for shipments transiting through Baltic routes. Each agreement reduced chaos and deepened his indispensability. The paradox fascinated investigators. Robert had engineered a version of peace, but it wasn't moral. It was mechanical. Every calm street corner, every closed police file represented profit. The city looked quieter, but beneath it lay a single unspoken rule: you don't move product, cash, or guns without passing through him. Veteran bikers called him the ambassador. Mafia elders, the accountant. Younger soldiers, the system. Whatever the nickname, the meaning was the same. He had replaced war with management. In a conversation later leaked from a wiretap, one rival summed it up bitterly. He's not running the streets anymore. He's running the silence. That silence became his greatest weapon. It disarmed police, seduced rivals, and rewrote the economics of fear in Montreal. By turning conflict into commerce, Martin Robert didn't just survive the underworld. He reinvented it. The myth in motion. Why? Even the Mafia still whispers his name. Today, in 2025, Martin Robert rarely appears in public. When he does, it's without spectacle, just a man in a black jacket, quiet, composed, walking into a cafe as if he doesn't own half of Quebec's shadow economy. His social media shows only family dinners, bike rides, and nothing that explains why both the RCMP and Interpol keep his file marked active, sensitive. For years, the police, the press, and even rival gangs have tried to answer the same question. How does he keep surviving? The answer is buried in everything he became. He learned early that real power isn't taken, it's agreed upon. You don't rule a criminal empire by fear, you rule it by necessity. Robert made himself necessary to everyone. If the Mafia wants safe passage through the port, they need his trucks. If the bikers want clean cash, they need his casino. If street crews want product, they need his pipeline. He turned enemies into clients, and clients into dependents. In Montreal's underworld, that kind of equilibrium is unheard of. Men like him don't retire. They either burn out or get buried. Yet Martin remains untouched. Untouched not because he hides, but because removing him would collapse the system. Every flow of money, every shipment, every payoff has a thread that runs back to his ledger. Cut him out, and no one gets paid. Even the mafia, whose code once demanded dominance, now whispers his name with reluctant respect. Not because they fear his gun, but because they fear his absence. The mythology only deepens his shield. To the new generation of bikers, he's a ghost story, a man who outsmarted both the state and the streets. To veterans, he's a reminder that the war for Quebec was lost not in shootouts, but in spreadsheets. Law enforcement can map his network, but not dismantle it. Prosecutors can trace the money, but not prove the crime. Every investigation ends the same way: circumstantial evidence, closed files, and another sighting of him dining somewhere quiet, untouched. Yet beneath that calm, whispers persist. Some say he's preparing to step back, shifting power to a council of younger angels trained in his methods. Others believe he's expanding again, this time into the digital frontier of cryptocurrency markets, offshore banking, and data laundering. In a world where money moves faster than bullets, he may already be 2 steps ahead, invisible to the next generation of investigators. But legends, no matter how quiet, always carry a risk: overexposure. For every man who built an empire on control, history writes the same ending. Someone, somewhere, decides silence has become too expensive. Whether that reckoning will find Martin Robert is anyone's guess. For now, he remains a paradox, a man who tamed chaos by understanding it, who turned crime into commerce, and who made even the mafia hesitate before speaking his name. And maybe that's the truest measure of power in the underworld. Not the noise you make while rising, but the silence that follows every room you leave.